Okay, so let's start with a word of prayer. Get on before we get anything. This time that together people be able to sit, live in the word, work with this group of praise. So last week, Mark passed through and the intermediate state we talked about. I drew some stuff on the board, and I have since erased all that and put up something that I hope makes a little bit more sense. So when we talk about the intermediate state, we're talking about the state of a person at death or their final condition or location where they end up finally. And so there's two main categories that we have to think of. You have to think of unbelievers and we have to think of believers. Okay? When we think about unbelievers, what's the intermediate state of an unbeliever? All unbelievers have the same intermediate state. Very simple. When we talk about believers, it's a little bit different because we have believers that are divided into categories according to the time in which they believe. So we have Old Testament believers, church age believers, have believers in the tribulation, believers in the millennium. And so those are all going to be slightly different in how they are in the intermediate state. So let's start with the easy one, the unbelievers. Okay. Unbelievers die. Death is how you get to the intermediate. Die. They go to hell. Got to choose a term, whether hell is the best term or not. That's the term we're going to use. Hell is going to be that holding area. Going to hell, then they will be resurrected for the great white throne judgment, final judgment, and then they're cast into the lake of fire. Lake of fire. So that is what's in the future for the unbelievers. So everything here that's all the intermediate state. Okay, does that make sense? Intermediate, in between state, between death, where they finally end up. Okay. So that's pretty straightforward. That's the same for all the unbelievers. Now, for believers, things get a little bit more complex. All believers are going to enter intermediate state, we're going to say through death. Okay. Put a question mark there because rapture, that's down in the week. That's down in details. We're going to say. So they enter the intermediate state upon death. Now, in the Old Testament, we have two terms that seem to indicate where an Old Testament believer went to paradise, Abraham, whatever those terms mean. Whatever that means, that's where they went to. Of course, the church age believer went to be with the Lord. Okay. So, I'm not going to follow any more lines, but Old Testament, church age, here with the Lord. Now, what happens to tribulation believers? Happens to them exactly a question mark. There is some type of intermediate state. What happens to people in the millennium who are believers who then die in the millennium? Well, that's another kind of question mark as to what exactly happens to them. It seems that there is some kind of intermediate state, even if it is brief. Even if when they die, they're resurrected immediately. The body, so still big time there. So, die, we have these different descriptions. Now, when they're in this space here, when they're in either paradise, Abraham's bosom, or with the Lord, this is all, they are all disembodied souls. They don't have a body when they're in those places. It's your spirit, soul that is there. So they're all disembodied. But every believer today who has died in Christ, they're disembodied spirit. They don't have a body. Then there's the rapture or resurrection. When resurrection happens, or rapture, church. Of course, resurrection is a physical thing. Spirit doesn't get resurrected, your body is resurrected. And so this is a new body. When the church, when it's raptured, those who are still living, they receive a new body without dying. So this resurrection happens at the rapture of the church, so that's only about church-age believers. You have a resurrection at the second coming. I just use that very generally, second coming. So that's going to be the Old Testament. State, tribulation, believers, all be resurrected death. And then at death here, at death, we're going to who's it died? They're all received physical body. Okay? And then we have final position is this final position of everything between here all intermediate state. So in the intermediate state, everyone is disembodied. Their bodies have died. Okay? So their spirit is in it. So there's different stations that they need. And I can make it a little bit more of a twist, to it. Is it seems, at least it seems to me, that the Old Testament saints are no longer in this place called paradise or Abraham's bosom. That even now the Old Testament saints are with the Lord after his resurrection. So, so that's the general understanding of it. Any questions about it? Right. This is pretty much a Orthodox Christian doctrine. I mean, there's some twists in it, such as purgatory. Other people would get like that. There's a picture of that purgatory. And we'll get to that later. We'll talk about postmortem salvation, postmortem sanctity. But as a rule, this is generally what everybody believes who would fit into the broad category of Christianity. Now, of course, you have Paul, who have different beliefs. Where That's dead. Yeah. Oh, it's there's a but anyway, closely, very closely. Uh, that's the dead. But, but anyway, whatever that group is, unorthodox, everybody else holds that when they do, it's kind of like you're just in this. Well, limbo is actually a technical term for the king. That's where infancy died here in limbo. It's kind of like in this catatonic coma type state where you're not conscious. You exist. What's that? That's, the limbo is a Catholic doctrine. So I know it's kind of, we can use that as a kind of slang, but it actually has a technical reference when it comes to death. And so we can't just say it for those. So this soul sleep, it's a soul unconscious. This is kind of like you're in a coma, you don't realize what's happening, and you stay in that coma until resurrection. As you're calling out. Where do they want to take it? Any other questions about the intermediate part? Lake of fire. Lake of fire. Anything? Yeah. Well, this wouldn't have anything to do with what you're being told. So even if you would wrongly believe we're in the millennium now, the resurrection isn't until they would say, or general resurrection. So this feels it overall. Anything else? Okay, the next term we want to consider in terms is heaven and hell. And using my green here to mark out stuff we covered. So as we think about heaven, you have to ask the question, what is heaven? We've talked about this some before, where as Christians talk about going to heaven. And in some sense, that is accurate, but in other senses, it's inaccurate. If we say that we're going to heaven to be with the Lord forever, that's inaccurate. Because heaven is not the destiny, final destination of the believer. The new earth is final destination of the believer. The new earth in the eternal state. Heaven is where you go before the millennium kingdom. So we have to think of it in those types of terms. Another way to think of heaven is this is the abode of God. This is where God is seen as dwelling. So in Hebrew, the word heaven is Shammai. But it's a common word used some 421 times, and it pretty much almost always appears plural. So, heaven. And we can speculate on why it's in the plural. not singular, the heavens. God, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And we don't necessarily have one good answer as to why heaven is plural. It could signify greatness of the heaven. You go outside and look up, or this great, really stand up, this great. Another reason that it could be plural is because there are multiple heavens. With Paul said he knew a man, or himself, knew a man that was taken up to a wife. Third heaven. There's at least three. So that's the Hebrew word that is the word sky, actually. The Greek word is uranon. Uranon. It appears some 281 times in the New Testament. About 2/3 of those times are singular. Okay. 94 of the times are plural. And of those 94 times, 76 are in the Gospels or in the Epistle to the Hebrews. Okay. This is probably did I write that here? Okay. Now, why do you think that is significant? Any idea? So you have this use of heavens, plural, verse 94 times in the New Testament. About a third of the occurrence of plural, 94 times. And almost all of those are, well, six of them are here in the Gospels or here. And so I would put it this way. Also, I would say it shows a very close connection to the principle. So getting this idea of heaven, and then on the Old Testament, where Shemaiah, heaven, almost always plural. So these books, Gospel, Hebrew, there's this close connection between them and the Old Testament. If you get right down to it, it's basically that. So those 76 references, important references, 56 of them. 56 of them are. There's 10 between Mark and Luke, none in John, and none in 10. But 56 now, pretty cool. There's this great and on this side of heaven, the Old Testament, New Testament. So in both Testaments, the word heaven is a reference to that which is above or that which is over earth. So it's often used in the sense of the counterpart to the earth. So in the beginning, heavens, the earth. But they're counterparts. You want to they don't split, they complement. Yeah. But the word heaven is also used in reference to a realm outside of the physical world. Okay. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's talking about the physical world. Heaven, atmosphere, outer space, the earth. But the term heaven is also used of a realm outside of our physical realm. And this is really the aspect of the term we're interested in. So heaven is the abode or the dwelling place of God. And it's not just simply a place, it's a sphere or realm of existence. A common expression in the Old Testament is God of heaven. God of heaven. Very important in God of heaven. So when we speak of going to heaven, it's not proper to think of it simply as a different place or a different place of health. But rather, it's to be defined as going to present God. When we talk about going to heaven, the emphasis is not on the place, much as it is the person who's there, present, or entering. So that's that. Now let's switch to hell. So there are many misconceptions about hell. Some think that's where Satan lives. And many of you run into the idea like somebody thinks, well, this is hell's where God's in heaven. Satan's in heaven. Okay. God's home is heaven. Satan's home is hell. That's floating around out there. Others believe that it's just another realm of existence. It's basically like the one we live in here. In other words, so hell is just almost like a copy of our world. Different realm. It's all the same stuff. Just a different realm. So there's all sorts of this. Those are all misconceptions. But when you look at this term in our English Bible, in the New King James, the word hell verse 32. And in the American Standard, it only in verse 13. Basically, the reason that now I was the New King James is translated Hebrew word and the word hell. The Standard is fully translated three words in the New Testament as so it seems to me that the Old Testament word for hell, or the idea of hell, is used infrequently in the New Testament. And when it is used, it's always used in the gospel. It's not strong. So let's talk about translation. Translation. The Hebrew word for hell is Sheol. The Greek word for hell is Gehenna. Then there's one kind of occurrence of the word hard rock or that's found that four. Probably a more modern part of house that's been occurs. It's not that it's not any part. It doesn't. So let's look at some basic senses of hell, how it's used. So turn to, let's just go to Deuteronomy chapter 32. We'll start with this. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 22. And you'll notice here that it's used of it says, for a fire kindled in my anger, it shall burn in the lowest hell, the lowest Sheol, consume the earth with her increase, and set on fire the foundations of the mountain. So let's definitely have this idea of judgment. Judgment that is called this. You don't turn there, but let me give you another passage. That whole verse. But in Psalm 9:17 it says, "The wicked shall be turned into hell, all the nations that they found." So again, the judgment night. Turn to Psalm 139. Psalm 139, verse 8. In this verse, we see that hell is basically used as a synonym for death. Death, dying, great. So it says, "If I ascend into heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, you are there." Now, really, the point that Paul is making is that you can't escape God. You can't ever be in a place where God can't find you or be there. And so he's using this language to say, if I ascend to heaven, you're there, and if I make my bed and shield, you're there. Turn over to Isaiah chapter 14, verse 9. Okay, this is all English, not Isaiah 14, 9. It says, "Hell from beneath, excited about you, meet you at your coming. It stirs up the dead for you, all the ones of the earth. It's raised up their throne on the So here is personified, hell being personified there as a person. Looking at hell, death is a place in waiting. Let's turn back to Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 5, verse 5. This is another chapter. Proverbs 5, verse 5. Okay, this is the context that makes it out. Does her feet go down to death, her steps they hold of death? Your feet go down to death, steps they hold of death. This is parallel. So the first time, feet go down to death. Then there's the second one, death. They hold of death. Her feet are the parallel of her step. To death of death. It was the same thing. Okay. Talk about death. Talk about wicked. Feet go down to death. Obviously, this is not talking about. And one of the places that is immoral one visit death. Not talking that. Not saying that death. But what it is saying is that where she leads, being part of an important there's two other categories. One's the depth of the earth. What I'm going to turn Though they dig into hell from where my hand touched them, so they come up there, you know. So dig into hell. And hell is a realm. It's not like it's beyond the earth. It's that dig into hell. It's just talking about the depths of the earth. Then finally, in the New Testament, the term hell in the New King James appears in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4. I'll just turn to that. This kind of 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4. It says, "For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into the king's darkness for the way." This was also possible. There's a place where some people are waiting, they're holding. So the word hell here is different than all the other terms in the Bible, and probably a bad translation. But that's basically dealing with our English Bibles. There's all these categories for how we view hell. It can be talking about death, it can be talking about a grave, it can be talking about just a bad place. It can be talking about the deepest part of the earth, even this holy place for angels. But now I want to get more into the Hebrew and Greek word. And so the Hebrew word is Sheol. And the basic idea of Sheol is realm of the dead. It's kind of a neutral term, a generic term, not necessarily talking about negative or positive. It's just the realm of the dead. We find it translated as grave in the Old Testament, different places, but it doesn't actually refer to a grave, a tomb, or a sepulcher. In fact, the Hebrew language has other words for that. And if it wants to just refer to a hole in the ground, calls it a pit. So there's different Hebrew words for that, but this is not it. This is not it. The word Sheol for 65 times in our Old Testament. And it has a pretty wide distribution across the different books of the Old Testament. And I just want to take a look at some selected passages here, and I think you have a whole list of them there. So my numbers aren't numbers that I have in my notes for those passages. I'm not the same as the numbers you have. So we're going to have to pay attention to the record. So it does do it. So pay attention to the record. So there's a few things before we do that. There's a few things to know about how this term Sheol is used. First, it's often used figuratively. What does that mean? It means, for us, that since many times this word appears in poetry, because poetry is often figurative, we must interpret this word according to the figure intended by the original writer. In other words, Sheol might speak of things like it might speak of things about the realm of the dead and say, as if, or like, something like that. And so it's being used figuratively, so we have to be careful. Second, while Sheol has a variety of specific uses, it always refers to something related to the afterlife. Okay, one interesting thing about The Hebrew language had a very limited vocabulary, a limited amount of words. Because of that, all the words have to take on a lot of different, they do a lot of things. And so, skill can be used to indicate a number of different things, but all of them have to be with the afternoon. They have to be the word skill or related word always called the afternoon. The third thing I want you to be aware of is that in the King James, the New King, and the New King James, they use a lot of synonyms for words. In fact, this was one of the key criteria for the King James translation, that if they could use a synonym, they could use a synonym. It's the same word over and over again. The problem with that, there's a problem. The problem is you lose track of verbal clues, the verbal flow that the original language provided. So you'll see places within a few verses, King James, two King James say great, they look dead, and then they say shield. And they go on to something else, use another synonym. And actually what they said is shield, shield, shield. That's what the original offer was. And so it made a little bit. So let's look at some of these passages. Let's start in Genesis. These passages basically go in order. Genesis chapter 37, verse 35. Genesis chapter 37, verse 35. It says here, and all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him. But he refused to be comforted and said, for I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning. Thus his father wept for him. Now, is Jacob, he's saying, well, they're just going to lower me down to a pit, to a tube. That's what he's saying. He says, no, or I shall go down to the grave, go down to the Sheol. That's a pit. Yeah, he said, I will go down in death. I will die in mourning. So Sheol there is being used of death. And, so Sheol doesn't mean death. It's not what the Hebrew word means, but it's used figuratively because death. It's sort of like what we find in the New Testament. You can say sometimes dead sleep. And there's places in the New Testament that talk about sleep. The word sleep, they mean death. God. This is the same thing here. Well, it's very biblical. Very biblical. Well, that might be true. Let's turn to Numbers chapter 16, verse 30. If you have a particular question about any person, it's up to you. Yeah. I'm just going to go on. Chapter 16, verse 30. This is actually verse 30 and verse 33. Here, again, this is the New King James. Verse 30, Numbers chapter 16, verse 30 says, but if the Lord creates a new thing, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive into the pit, the Sheol, then you will understand that these men have rejected the Lord, verse 33. So they and all those with them went down alive into the pit, to Sheol. The earth closed over them, and they perished from among the assembly. So this is kind of a different interesting use of the term Sheol, pit. This verse specifies that the people spoken of go down into Sheol alive, or living. They go into Sheol living. It says in 30, and they go down alive into the pit. Verse 33. But with them went down alive into the pit. So they're going alive into Sheol. Now, this, of course, doesn't fit precisely with the idea of death, but it does fit the idea of afterlife. You do not have to die into afterlife. The context of this passage is the rebellion of Korah. Specifically, this verse is speaking of the judgment of Korah and those who were with him. Verse 29, verse 53, indicates that death is the judgment. And this is the judgment for Korah's rebellion, death. But it's not going to be a normal death or a typical death. It's going to be something that's abnormal, something unusual, out of the ordinary. And the thing that is out of the ordinary is they go down alive. Sheol. This reference becomes important because there are other places in the Bible that speak about going alive, going alive into Hades. I think all of those point back. Yeah. But this one specifically, the kind of thing that this is going to be so different, and everybody will know this is for more. But this is a natural disaster. That this is God. So thing that's different about this that go on. So let's go to another one, 2 Samuel chapter 22. 2 Samuel chapter 22, verse 6. 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 6. 2 Samuel 22. Chapter 22, verse 6. 22, 6. It says, the sorrows of Sheol surround me, the snares of death in front of me. So here we see that Sheol is equivalent to death. In the sorrows of Sheol, the snares of death. So it's death. It's talking about Sheol, it's talking about death here. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Now let's turn to Isaiah chapter 14, verse 9. Isaiah 14:9. Part of this. It says 9, 11, 15. 9, 11. So verse 9, hell, Sheol, from beneath is excited about you, each picture. It stirs up the dead for you, all the chief ones of the earth. It has raised up from your throne all the king of the nation. Drop down to verse 11. Your pomp is brought down to Sheol. and the sound of your stringed instrument, maggots, the maggot is spread under you, and worms cover you. Verse 15. Yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depth of the pit. And that is pit. That's what it is. There's 4. So in this passage, you see, well, at least from what I read, the King James uses the synonym first time, even Sheol, over and over. And it's Sheol is being personified. They're spoken of as a person. And so, but again, it's still it's talked about, yeah. Let's look at Isaiah 57. And then it says, says, you went to the king with ointment and preached perfume. You sent your messengers far off, and even descended to Sheol. Here it's talking about far extent, I say. Or Sheol is here. Metaphorically, figuratively, you went to the absolute outer extreme of that. So that's a kind of Sheol. So Psalm 16:10. A lot of times the order of the English Bible, order. So Hebrew Bible, Psalm 16. And you know what that says? 16. Yeah, there you go. But for you will not leave my soul in Sheol, nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption. So we're going to talk a great deal more about that when we get to the New Testament passage. That's it's the 31 and 32. 31 and we'll come back to that. So I think you get a pretty good sense of this word, Sheol. Always, no matter if it's being used figuratively or literally, it's often being figuratively, but it's always being used of the afterlife. It's almost always incorporating something about death. And not exactly always clear as to what the nature of it, what's the nature of Sheol is. I mean, you do have some verses where it seems pretty clear, like Proverbs 23:14. You shall beat him with a rod and deliver his soul from hell, from Sheol. Well, that sounds pretty negative. That sounds pretty negative. The number 6 passage, down alive in the Sheol, that sounds like it's not a good place. Proverbs 1:12, let us swallow them alive like Sheol, behold, so there are some negative references to it, but you have to look at the context for it's called. So, any questions or observations that cool. Yeah, that's what I'm about. So, this was in reference to Isaiah 57, verse 9. Even the sin to Sheol is in it for the free, there's free outer place of it there. That could possibly be connected, the idea could possibly be connected to the phrase outer darkness that appears in the New Testament. So in Matthew chapter 8, when we turn to Matthew chapter 8, this is the illustrated point. Matthew chapter 8, verse 12. Says, but the sons of the kingdom will be cast into outer darkness, where the thief and the phrase outer darkness is only used in Matthew's gospel and always connected to the national form. And Matthew chapter 8, verse 12 refers to the sons of the kingdom. In this passage where the centurion has faith and the Lord says, I have not found such great faith, not even in Israel. Verse 11, and I say to you that many will come from east and west and sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. Okay? They will come from east and west. This is an idea of income. Verse 12. But the sons of the kingdom cast out of darkness. You're going to be casted out of darkness. So this idea of outer darkness is being contrasted with entering the kingdom. Into the kingdom, or what? Cast out. So in this particular case, it's not saying there's anybody is cast. It's not. Or cast. So that's 8:12. Yeah. Chapter 22, Matthew chapter 22, verse 13. Chapter 22, verse 13. And it says, then the king said to the servant, bind him hand and foot, take him away, cast him down the darkness. There will be peace, gnashing of teeth. And here, the person who's being taken down and cast into the outer darkness is a person who has rejected the invitation to the wedding, then decides to show up, but they show up unprepared. We don't have the wedding garment on. And so the master of the wedding says, what do you do? How'd you get here? No answer. Yes, outer darkness. So, but this too is a kingdom paragraph. So in verse 2, in chapter 23, verse 2, it says, Kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who arranged a marriage for his son. So again, kingdom context, ones who are invited but didn't accept the invitation, if they think they're going to show up anyway, without meeting the requirements is you got to have your wedding requirements. Not meeting the requirements, but you're going to be casting the requirements. Now, we can look back on this, and we understand that what Jesus was indicating here is that the Jews that had rejected him, they rejected his offer of the kingdom. It's not that they can't get into the kingdom. They can still get into the kingdom, but they got to get into the same way that everybody else gets in. Proper response to the invitation. You can't just show up and think, I'm a Jew, I'm getting in. Nope, we'll be cast out. And finally, one more reference. This is chapter 25, verse 30. Chapter 25, verse 30. Where it says, cast the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So this is the unprofitable servant is the one who was given something, but he did nothing with it. From this, we can conclude that the ones who won't enter the kingdom aren't prepared to enter the kingdom, and they will have cast out from outer darkness is torment. So this outer darkness is the term used in contact in the kingdom. And it seems to me that all people, there's only three places where specifically down are always context prepared, unprepared. So prepared kingdom and effort, they're not prepared. Cast out on the dark. Yeah, we'll get to that. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that when we cover some of these other terms that are very nice. What does that mean? I'll cover that when I talk about it more. Talk about Christ. Well, that's all we have time for tonight. So that brings us up to date on the Old Testament use of the word healed. Okay, next week we're going to talk about, we'll get to the New Testament, and we're going to talk about the word Hades. Hades. What exactly is this word Hades? What does it mean? We're also going to talk about the hymn. The hymn. Very interesting word used in an interesting, I think, pretty interesting way. Unfortunately, the term Gehenna is almost always translated as hell. The problem with that is not hell, Gehenna. A different thing. So Gehenna it's a specific place on earth. Okay, so I'll explain all that Well, it's not just a place where they turn the track. I mean, you're kind of right, but it goes beyond that. They burn more than track. So, but we'll talk about that Gehenna and why we got this word that doesn't mean hell. Talk about a very specific place. Why is that taken? Why do our Bibles change? Guys do use Bible translation. They're pretty smart. We may not always like what they do, but they're still pretty smart guys. Why would they think that's a good way to get him? And you have to, I don't know why. I'm just proposing. But we'll talk about that. So, Hades and Gehenna next week. And I think in your notes, at the end of your note, on your sheet, have Valley of Hinnom there. So that's just going to be the point of time. So I think that'll probably take up all our time. And I'll have, by that time, I'll have some more, another set of videos for you that has all the verses. And so I put those, I'm pretty sure I'm giving you all the verses, all the passages where these words occur. So you can look them all. Study them all out on another. Okay. Well, that's all we got time for. So let me pray and we'll be done. And I'll take questions. Lord, we give you thanks for this time that we've had together. And we're thankful, A, for knowing that death is not the end. That there's something beyond that. And B, that we can have confidence and assurance that at our death, we can be with you. And so we get this confidence not on what we necessarily know, certainly not what we do, but because it's done for right. We said that. Any questions, any thoughts?